Thank you. I was supposed to say that. Catherine Vance is a member of Bay Area UU Church in Houston. She's a writer and a teacher of writing and is involved in social justice ministry with her congregation. She is enrolled in the clinical pastoral chaplaincy program at MD Anderson Hospital. Catherine's program today is titled Share Your Thread. Come on up, Catherine.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today. Before I get into the sermon proper, I thought I would read you the poem that was the impetus for the title of the sermon. It's from the words of poet William Stafford, his work, The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you can do to stop time's unfolding, but don't ever let go of the thread. Well, I grew up in Houston. My father moved us here from Tennessee when I was 10 to go to work for NASA. So my family roots really are in the Appalachians, and I lived in Western North Carolina for many years as an adult. And while I was there, one of the things that I did was teach a course in the literature of the region. And one of the books that I covered was called Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. You might remember it was made into a movie. It had Nicole Kidman and Jude Law. It was about a Civil War soldier and his journey back to the woman that he loved. Well, I bring it up because it was loosely based on facts. And one of the things that's interesting for our purposes is that the Nicole Kidman character, Ada, was the daughter of a Universalist preacher. And there really was a little Universalist enclave up in an isolated mountainous part of the Blue Ridge. Well, I took my students to visit Inman's Chapel. It looks like a one-room schoolhouse, and it had a wooden ceiling that was painted sky blue and a pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room for warmth. And the basement was still full of antique hymnals published by Beacon Press. In actuality, the church had been established in 1902, and it was managed by the Universalist Women's National Missionary Association. If you ever believed that we would have a missionary association. Well, it was really remarkable in its day, this little place, because it existed not only as a hell-free island and a sea of fundamentalist thinking in a remote rural location, but also because it had a female minister, Hannah Jewett Powell. And it was a place where Black, white, and Native American congregants, being in the Cherokee territory, they could all sit side by side. Well, I'm telling you this story because in these divisive times, I've begun to feel a little bit fiery about getting Unitarian Universalism's ideas out there in places where you'd least expect them, in places where we know they're really most needed. Why, do you think, are we so quiet? Why do we continue to keep the good news of Unitarian Universalism so close to our chests? Well, I actually have lots of predecessors who have asked this question. There was a book called Salted with Fire that came out in 1994, and it's about the topic of UU evangelism. And it's full of strategies and action steps for bringing UUism into a larger presence. Recently, there's been an increased flurry of activity on the Southern Region Facebook page. And a man named Roger wrote, "We need to start seeing UUism as a set of values that so many communities and small towns want and need." Well, there are a number of reasons why we Unitarians don't consistently share our personal faith stories or develop our elevator speeches about what UUism is to us. Well, for sure, we don't want to do to others what we don't want done to ourselves. We don't want to start proselytizing or recruiting and trying to convert others to our way of thinking. Maybe we don't start a conversation because we believe we're a little too complex to explain unless we're sure that a person has the background and the education or the cultural perspective to understand us. Maybe, truth be known, we just like being part of a small elite group and we don't feel a need to tell others about our club. We might worry that people will feel afraid of us because we threaten everything that they have established or profess. And people who feel threatened will sometimes offer back threat, and we just don't want to open that can of worms. And finally, it might just be that we're a little bit lazy, just riding the status quo, happy as we are. Well, some of us will say, but I do share the good news of Unitarian Universalism to the world. I do it every day with the love and acceptance I show, with the devotion I have to our mission. I show this to everyone I meet, regardless of creed, color, stated gender, or sexual orientation. I do it by living our 7 principles and by my consistent presence and involvement in social justice. Well, all that is really great. It's a good way to be, a good way to present ourselves to society, but it doesn't always identify us. Think of it from the other person's point of view. There are people out there now who are looking and struggling, people who might be saved years of searching if only they knew that there was a liberal religion where they could feel free to be who they were, people who don't have a spiritual community but want one. I was one of those people. If only my favorite high school teacher had given me some clues and had even mentioned the words Unitarian Universalism. I ran into her years later. We were colleagues at University of Texas at San Antonio in the English department. And she told me then that she was a Unitarian and had been a member at First UU in Houston. Well, I didn't find a Unitarian church on my own until I was 40 years old, and I had started looking when I was 17 for something that fit me better than the mainstream Christianity with which I grew up. Well, there are 587 Baptist churches and 213 non-denominational churches in the Houston area alone. But there are only a little over 1,000 UU churches worldwide. I contacted the Southern region chalice lighters and asked them to tell me about our newest UU churches. But a lot of the congregation building work now is being done by crowdfunding sites, not by the UUA. In Texas, newer congregations like the UU Fellowship in Abilene or El Paso, fairly large towns, only have a handful of members. But if the Universalist Women's National Missionary Association could do it in a place like post-Civil War, rural Baptist Confederate Coal Mountain, North Carolina, it ought to be possible in cities like Galveston and Houston for us to give witness to the good news that there is no hell and that you're good exactly as you are, no matter your history, your color, or your orientation, and that it's fine to believe in God or Allah or Gaia or something that you call source or nothing at all. Well, I want to make it clear that I'm not talking about a campaign necessarily to amplify UU real estate or pump up the membership, although there are some who openly do espouse that course of action. The growth of UU churches wouldn't be a big push of mine necessarily, but I feel like it might be a natural outcome from the joy of helping those who want to find a place to connect or who are actively looking for alternatives to what they grew up with. You know what the world is like out there now, the us and the them, the politically and religiously. So let's not evangelize, but maybe let's witness. People won't find out about us until we tell them. Share a link to a sermon or start a podcast telling people about this creedless church where the worth and dignity of every person is respected and where people are encouraged to soul search and find their own free and responsible path to truth and meaning. When we intentionally share who we are and share how we affiliate as congregations and make it safe for people to ask us questions, encouraged to come and visit, that's a way to change lives and heal our world. Well, recently I started on my own elevator speech. I chose this church because I wanted the freedom to be spiritual in a way that reflected what I knew inside of myself to be true, and because I learned so much every day from knowing people like you who are on your own personal journey, defining your own beliefs and ideas about how you're connected to time and matter and the universe. And if that resonates with people, I say, I am happy to tell you more. Well, recently, I was so touched by the film Come Sunday, which is the story of the Reverend Carlton Pearson, who was a minister at the fundamentalist Higher Dimensions Evangelistic Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was a student of Oral Roberts, if you know who that kind of famous or infamous evangelist is. Well, a very unusual thing happened to Carlton. In 1994, he was watching a television program about the genocide in Rwanda, and he had an epiphany and realized that God would not relegate his children to a fiery eternity just because they didn't believe in the same Jesus that he did. But even though he was a minister, Carlton had never heard of Unitarian Universalism. He just knew from inside of himself that what he was thinking was true. And so he told his congregation about it, his fundamentalist congregation. Well, half of them left, but the other half stayed because what he had said resonated with them as well. It seemed true. So in 2008, his hell-free, gay-friendly church was absorbed into All Souls Unitarian in Tulsa. And this is where he preaches today, once a month. Well, while his story of personal epiphany is inspiring, wouldn't it have been great if he hadn't had to search and struggle and go through all that before he wound up at All Souls? What if he had just known because someone had told him? Telling others about youism doesn't have to smack of evangelism. It's not egotistical, and it isn't a display of our superiority. In fact, I think it's a little bit egotistical not to tell. If you think it's not your job to speak out about it, I ask you to reconsider. Pick your moments. In our social justice work, we don't hesitate to assist with food or money or information. If somebody told you that they needed something and you knew where they could find it, you would tell them. The investigation and the decision would still be theirs to explore. So offer love combined with reason. Tell about service and caring, tolerance, and social justice. Share our news of personal salvation that's available in a way that only each individual can define. In his poem, The Way It Is, poet William Stafford spoke of a thread that's followed and held, of something that we can trust and rely on to keep ourselves from getting lost. For many of us, Unitarian Universalism is that thread. But he also wrote, people wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread because it's hard for others to see. 100 years ago, that thread was shared on a mountaintop in far western North Carolina. 100 years even before that, the Universalist preacher John Murray wrote, give the people something of your new vision. You possess only a small light, but uncover it and let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of all. Give them hope and courage. Give them kindness and everlasting love. Share your thread. Thank you for your presence here today.